All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in to our first knowledge series. This is Christopher. Next. We can hear. So this is the scope that we'll be covering today. So we're going to start on giving you all a broad overview of basically energy balance, weight loss guidelines. Today's focus will be mainly centered on weight loss guidelines, but there will still be portion on basically how to bulk and gain. But we'll be having a future series on, or in-depth series on how to gain mass. Is cardio or strength training best for fat loss? How should I structure my macros for fat loss? Is carbs the enemy? Which diet is best for fat loss? Timing of carbs for fat loss? Other considerations? Supplements that potentially aid in fat loss? Why am I not losing weight? Strategies to stay fuller when dieting? What a healthy meal will look like? And finally, we'll end off with just some easy and simple tips you can take away. Basically, habit-based coaching. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so for some of you, you're only here for hypertrophy segment. So we'll start off with this tidbit or nugget for you. So why is fat loss important for hypertrophy? So for hypertrophy, you will still need to go into a fat loss phase, as you cannot be on hypertrophy your whole life or whole year, right? If you look at bodybuilders also, they have different phases where they are in their training cycle. There'll be a bulking phase, there'll be a leaning phase, right? And they will always alternate between these different phases, or even a maintenance phase, but they do not stay on one phase their whole life. If not, you wouldn't make the most gains in that sense. So this also leads to the point, this helps to resensitize the body for a muscle gaining phase. So if you always stay in a hypertrophy phase, after a certain point, the stimulus for growth will start to decay at the later half of things. Just like your training also, you don't want to keep it the same for a long period of time, as your stimulus will start to make the least amount of gains as the training goes on. That's why we have to switch things up little bit by bit. Same goes for nutrition. You have to periodize your different phases, whether it's hypertrophy or fat loss. So to kick things off, there are two. We'll be looking at energy intake and energy expenditure next. So these two components comprises of your energy balance. So what you put in your body, that's considered your energy intake. So there are four main macronutrients that that is comprised. So first we fats, then we have carbs, protein, and alcohol. So if you look at the energy value of all of these macronutrients, fats has the highest calories per gram. Alcohol, second highest. It's not the most useful calories because it just gets you, it doesn't have a lot of nutritional content, or in fact very little nutritional content, but we still understand that some of you still have it as part of different festive season, or maybe some of you just like wine, so that's fine. Just we'll cover more in depth with this next, so let's just move on to the next. So some of you may find it really challenging to understand nutrition, like so we thought that looking at a nutritional label for a food that I will eat this tuna chunks in water. I don't know about all of you, but if you look at the left-hand corner of this, if you look at the per serving, so you look at, for this tuna, you basically have 39 calories. The kcal, it can also be referred to as 39 calories. Then with that serving size, you have 8.8 grams of protein, very minimal fat, 0.4, and you have very minimal carbs as well, so 0.3. So for people looking to lose fat, this is a good option because it gives you very little calories and it gives you a very high protein ratio out of the total calories that is comprised. So the total weight of this will be 37 times 3. As you can see, the top hand corner, you have serving size, 37 gram, and servings per package is 3. So if you want to take the total amount, you take 37 times 3 to give you your main serving size. So for the same, if you want to look at your calories, your total calories for this tuna can, You take 39 times 3, then that will give you a good 117 calories, right? So that will be a starting point. So do not get confused by just looking at like the per serving, because sometimes some of you may be eating more than the per serving. You may be eating the whole can and thinking like, I'm just taking the per serving. So this is very important. And just some easy calculation, if you look at it, this is a rough estimate. It may not equate to the number you see there. So if you were to take, since we know protein, 8.8 gram has 4 calories, you take that amount, you multiply by 4, that will give us roughly about 32 calories. You look at your fat, you have 0.4, you multiply that by 9 because it has 9 calories per gram, that will give us about 3.6. Then if you add your carbs also 0.3 times 4, that will give you about 1.2. So ballpark, if you add all of this, it will be roughly close to the calories that's stated there. Yeah, so let's move on. So now moving on to the other side of the equation of energy balance, which is energy expenditure. So basically, what goes in must come out, right? So that's why we have energy expenditure. So 4 main components that we are looking at here. First will be your resting metabolic rate. So this one, assuming you just woke up from bed, you are doing nothing, how much calories are you consuming? So that's your RMR. Then the next thing we have what we call the thermic effect of food. So for this thermic effect of food, like when we eat food, when we digest, absorption of nutrients is an active process. So that takes energy. And the very act, if you think of it, the very act of eating really increases your metabolism. And just a quick tidbit, out of all the macronutrients, protein has the highest thermic effect of food. So assuming same calorie equated, let's say this protein and this carb has higher 100 calories, protein, you'll be taking more energy to consume protein. Even though they have the same calories, but you are expending more energy to consume protein. Then next, you have your physical activity, thermogenesis. So that one, for most people, number 3 and number 4 will be where we expend the most calories. So if you train for 4 to 6 days a week, and depending on how intense you train, depending on your strength level, if you're really strong, you're doing really heavy weights, heavy squats, whatnot, you'll be expending a lot more calories compared to someone who's weaker. That's why we get you all to progressively increase the weights that you do, because you're stronger, you're going to look even more amazing. It's just a fact. You're just going to work even harder, right? And also it depends on the phase that you're in. So for example, if you're in an AMPK phase versus a hypertrophy phase, hypertrophy phase will be more demanding in terms of the calorie that you expend, although the rest time is longer, but you are going a lot heavier, you're expending a lot more calories. Then, and also if you have a higher muscle mass, and let's say you compare myself and someone who's way lighter, someone who's lighter is not going to burn as much calories as someone who's heavier and has to carry a heavier muscle mass. So then we also have the non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So in short, this is called your NEAT. So basically, these are other things that you do that you don't think of as exercise. So like maybe walking the dog, walking up the stairs, do your grocery shopping, even doing a household chores. This will be, for some people, if they don't really exercise much, this can even rank higher than the physical activity. And that's also why we recommend taking daily steps as a guide to improve or increase this NEAT. Okay, let's move on. So, example. So if somebody has a resting metabolic rate of, let's say, 1,500, and we assume this is a sedentary person who doesn't really move much, we will take the rough thermic effect of food and non-exercise activity thermogenesis to be about 300. That will give us about 1,800 for maintenance calories. Then the next component, of course, your physical activity. This will be dependent on the phase of training, as I mentioned, your training status and muscle mass. So just to keep it very simple, if you want to let's say my weight is 60 kg. I want to maintain 60 kg. And I calculated that my maintenance calorie is 1,800. And I don't do any physical activity. That is the amount that I want to stay at to maintain 60 kg. Now, if I want to lose weight, which obviously most of you here want to do, let's say we keep that same resting metabolic rate, you add a physical activity component to that. Let's say your AMPK phase, you burn about 200 to 300 calories. Obviously, if you're stronger, you're working harder, you burn more. So let's just make some easy assumptions. You burn 300 calories, then obviously, if you still keep these same calories, and you keep, let's say you train for 4 days a week, you will be in a deficit. Roughly, if you are in a 3,500 calorie deficit, so let's say a calorie deficit of 500 over a period of 7 days, you will be losing about estimated of 1 pound of fat, or 1 pound per week of your weight. We'll explain more in detail later. Let's move on to the next. Okay, so now we're just going to go in even deeper. We're going to talk about energy balance. So really simple, energy in minus energy out or energy expenditure will determine your energy stored or lost in the system in your body, right? So whatever you put in your body, some of it will go up, some of it will stay. If there's a lot more energy stored in your body, then ultimately over time, you will put on fat mass or whatnot, depending on what you've been doing. Whether you've been training, whether you've been eating enough protein, or whether you've just been eating, right? If you've just been eating, you have that excess stored calories or stored energy in your body over a prolonged period of time, then you will put on extra weight, and the weight will slowly start to creep up. And maybe for some people who have been doing that unknowingly, they will start to see like maybe a 5 kg difference, and then like, oh shit, I'm like fat overnight. But you don't get fat overnight. It happens over a prolonged period of time, right? Same thing, you like that. So that one day that you binge eat isn't exactly the one that gets you really fat, but it's that constant period of calorie surplus that you will put on additional weight. One thing that's really important here, energy balance does not equal to the amount of tissue change in your body. So that does not equate to, let's say, I have a 500 calorie surplus, or I'm eating 500, I have 500 energy more in my body, or energy stored. That does not mean I put on 500 gram of protein or muscle, rather. Same for energy loss. Doesn't mean I'm in a 500 calorie deficit. I will be losing 500 gram of fats. So some caveats here. So for example, if somebody eats in a 30% calorie deficit for a month, the amount of fat mass and lean body mass loss will depend on other factors other than calories. So we'll look at things like your protein intake, your physical activity, basically how hard you're training, and other host of factors. One thing's for certain, if you want to lose weight over a prolonged period of time, the way to go is to be in an energy deficit, or to be ensuring that you have energy lost in your system, right? Then you will progressively be losing weight over time. But you want to ensure that you have protein so that the weight that you lose is not so much muscle. It will be more prioritized on fats. So if you don't have enough protein and you go in a huge deficit, you will be losing weight, yes, but you'll be losing muscle also as part of it. Definitely when you go in an energy deficit, it is very hard to completely ensure that you don't lose any muscle. You will most probably lose some muscle that goes with it. But the goal is to lose mostly fats and minimal muscle. That's why you want to make sure your training stimulus is good. You want to make sure that your protein intake is sufficient. Yes, so let's go to the next. So with that, some guidelines on the rate of weight loss. So we're looking at 0.5 to 1% per week For most people, this will be likely the best conditions. Then, for how long you should be in a weight loss phase, it should be about 1.5 month to about 3 months. And we know some of you just want to have it quick. Then in that case, a minimum will be 3 weeks. The upper end, if you really feel like the diet is going well, energy level is still going good, your strength isn't impacted to a large degree, then you can keep it to the upper end, where you still go from 12 to 16 weeks. But for most people, if you stay within a zone of 6 to 12 weeks, that will be ideal. So as we mentioned earlier, if you notice, we didn't put here 52 weeks, it's not the whole year round, it is this range. And then following this range, you can obviously go into a maintenance, or you can go to a muscle gain phase. So obviously, all those will be elaborated in the future series. So, reason why we do that, if you were to lose faster than 1% per week, there will be a greater likelihood of losing muscle mass, which most of us wouldn't want to, because we will love to look toned and still look lean. Especially for people who have a higher training experience, the higher deficit you go, the higher likelihood of you losing even more muscle mass. So the more advanced you are in your training phase, probably you want to be a little bit more conservative with your weight loss rates. So for example, let's say someone like Edmund, maybe he'll be looking at something like 0.5 to 0.75 rather than like a 1% per week. The other factor to consider is there'll be performance decrement. So if you go at too much too soon, your performance will take a hit. And we know some of you have certain skills that you're working towards. Let's say the chin-up, the push-up, those stuff. So that might be impacted to a large degree if you were to go at too high a deficit. Let me see. The reason why we have a minimum of 3 weeks, so most of the weight that you will lose initially will be water weight. So, that's why it's really difficult to differentiate whether you lose fat or water weight until at least 2 weeks of data is collected. And obviously, when you go into a diet phase or whatever phase you're in, you want to see some changes. And if you do it for 2 weeks, then your weight doesn't really go down, you still kind of look the same, and then you'll be like, shit, I didn't really do much. I didn't change much, obviously, because you are only in that phase for 2 weeks. So that's why there's a minimum phase. Yeah, and why you keep an upper end is obviously you don't want to exceed that as well. And we also keep the upper end is because most people who have been doing dieting for too long, you will be at a chronic dieting risk, and your chances of rebounding your weight gain will be pretty high. So that's why I want to keep that in mind. Okay, let's go to the next. So with that said, we have the next. So basically for each phase, what are some limits that you should look at? So we'll be looking at something like less than or equals to 10% of your body weight. And you also want to be looking at something like more than or equals to 3% of your body weight. Obviously, if not, you're not going to feel motivated. And for shorter diet, assuming it's 6 weeks, we'll be looking at something like 1% weight loss per week, right? So 6, for example, somebody who's 100 kg, for example, so you'll be looking at 6 kg over a period of 6 weeks. Then if it's a longer diet, this one, obviously, because we know that it's a 10% cap, then it has to be lower than this 1% per week. So it's probably like 0.7, 0.8%. So one more example here. So for example, if you want to attain your maximum total loss of 10% body weight, a diet of at least 10 weeks must be run in order to avoid exceeding your rate limits. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So with that said, this is an example because some of you probably find it hard to visualize. So this is a client that we had. So he started on 9 November. His end goal is 31st December. That's a period of 7 weeks. His start body weight is about 77 kg. Just taking a conservative approach of 0.75% of his body weight, we'll be looking at him losing about 0.58 something. This is just a round up, but it'll be about 0.6 or 600 grams. If you look after a period of 7 weeks, the total weight loss will be 4 kg. And then after all of this is done, if you look at the projected weight, it will be 73 kg. So this is just an example of something that has worked. This person is currently at 72.2 kg. Obviously, he was pretty close to the goal. He was probably about 73.5 at the end of the year, but we thought was a pretty good target to work with. And that's why there are a lot of variables. What you plan for may not be what you actually get. As I mentioned, your changes in energy balance or energy storage loss or gain may not be equated to your muscle mass gain or loss. Very interestingly, for this client, when we did his body fat measurement, he lost most of it from fats, but he lost some muscle as well. But it's because his protein intake was sufficient, which will be covered later. Okay, now I'll pass the time to Myren to take over.
Okay, guys, before I comment on my part, this is the part where you want to take notes as well. And this is how I'm pretty sure that this will cover a lot of your questions that you have, or maybe you have even more questions. So why don't you guys have a 3 minutes break? I will count down from now and I'll see you back. Okay. All right, welcome back. And I'm going to go straight into the details of stuff. And I'm sure these are some of the questions that you guys have. So the first thing is doing cardio, HIIT, or strength training the best for fat loss? Honestly, there is no best, and I'll explain why later on. I know some of you want to do more cardio or have more cardio in your customized program, but after I explain these 2 slides, you will have a better picture of why some things are better than others or why it's better to combine. Right, so the first thing is steady state aerobic cardio, or what we refer to as LISS. It basically means low intensity steady state cardio. What you're going to think of is like spinning or a light jog, something that feels like a 6 to 7 RPE. Well, LISS or steady state cardio burns calories, yes, it does. But the thing is that it only burns when you're doing it. So technically, if you stop jogging, the minute you stop jogging and your metabolism cools down, you really pretty much just stop burning altogether. And just take note that if you are doing LISS, steady state cardio, you have to do it for a prolonged period of 20 minutes or more. Reason being, it takes your body about 8 minutes to start tapping into your aerobic glycolysis. What it means is that it starts to burn or tap into your fatty acids. So if you just stop at 10 minutes, technically you're just burning your fats for 2 minutes. So that's something to take note of. All right, so the second one, HIIT. Before we actually move on to what actually HIIT means, a lot of the things that are out there, let me just explain, it is not true HIIT. True HIIT, it's a very short burst, a very short intense burst of training, followed by 4 to 6 times of the rest times. All right, so for example, if you are going to go at 1 minute at 100%, you're going to rest 7 to 8 minutes or even more just to recover from that. For those of you that have taken part in the Tactical Strength Challenge 2 years ago where we organized it, I'm sure you guys remember the kind of training that we did where we worked for 3 good minutes and we rested for 12 minutes. That is a true HIIT. And to be honest, not many people can sustain that kind of effort because the stress levels is just way too much. And I remember all of you, or some of you were saying that just before you come for training, you guys were kind of scared for Metcon because that is how HIIT should be like. You should be scared of it, all right? What most people are doing out there is actually HISS, high intensity steady state work, all right? That's where you get like things like F45, BFit, and everything that's out there. So HIIT or HISS creates this thing called the Epoc, the excess post-oxygen consumption. And what this Epoc does is that it burns up to 6 to 15% more calories throughout the day. So you're saying then in that case, we should do more HIIT. So the problem with that is that most people are not strong to do HIIT in the first place. And the second thing is that too much HIIT will cause this thing called the adrenal fatigue, and it will cause too much chronic stress in your body. So just a brief explanation of what this adrenal fatigue is. Basically, your adrenals controls your cortisol or your stress hormones. If you have an adrenal fatigue, it would then dampen or increase your cortisol hormones by too much. And then this thing called the catecholamines, which is your red alert stress hormones, will be increased. When this increases to a point that you cannot control it, it affects your whole thyroid regulation. And technically, you're going to cause a lot of chronic stress in the body. When there is too much chronic stress in the body, it causes this thing called the insulin cortisol seesaw. Let me see. In the whole insulin cortisol seesaw is when you experience too much stress either from your training or from just life daily stresses. What this does, just very briefly, to understand why stress levels is so important and you have to control it. When your body senses stress, be it in training or in your daily life, it increases this thing called the cortisol. What cortisol does is that it increases, or rather it produces fatty acids and glucose into the bloodstream. So it lets out this fuel, which is your fatty acids and glucose, into the bloodstream. Now, when your body senses there's too much cortisol, or rather too much of this fatty acids and glucose in the bloodstream, what it does is that the insulin will be spiked up. What insulin does is that it opens up the floodgates for your muscle cells and all cells of your body, including your fatty acids, to absorb this glucose and fatty acids. If you are training, when you're training, you are producing cortisol, which is great. You use up this energy, you use up the glucose and the fatty acids. But the problem is, what if you are not training? Where does the glucose and the fatty acids go? They enter your cells, which is your muscle cells, your liver cells, and ultimately your fat cells, because your muscle cells have already overspilled. And that's why you need to control your stress levels, because otherwise you'll be putting on a lot of fat. And HIIT, too much of it, would cause this problem as well. Okay, and I'm going to move on to the third thing. Effective strength training program, executed precisely. And just note that I said that it has to be executed precisely, which means your reps that you execute, the weight that you're using has to be of a certain intensity. You have to ensure that you're not using momentum. You have to ensure that you're contracting with perfect technique, because only then can you increase the carbohydrate uptake. And what a strength training program does is that it helps to shuttle your carbohydrates to the right places, which is your muscle cells. Number two, it provides a positive endocrine response. What that means is that it increases your androgen levels or your testosterone levels to a positive state. And what testosterone does is that it helps to shuttle the nutrients into the right cells. Right? So pretty much it is very similar to insulin. And number three, it shifts your body into a fat burning state at rest. So you can say whatever you want to say or believe or whatever you want to believe, but when you are training, you are predominantly burning carbohydrates, no matter how intense you are training. The more intense you're training, the more carbohydrates you're burning. So some of you are on this phase called the AMPK, or in scientific term, it's called the Adenosine Monophosphate kinase phase. You don't need to know that. But anyway, the AMPK phase is meant to be very short rest, and you should feel like a 10 RPE at the end. The reason for that is because you want to burn through as much carbohydrates during your training as possible, so that when you stop your training during your recovery days, or actually just the minute you exit the gym, your body is like, okay, I'm going to consume all the carbohydrates that you are going to put in your mouth in the next meal. I'm going to store all of that as fuel for my glycogen to be replenished for the next AMPK training. So because you are already in a calorie deficit and in a way, not a lot of carbohydrates being consumed, these carbohydrates that are stored will be stored as muscle glycogen, and your body will automatically shift your state into a fat burning state when you are resting. So when you're resting, that's where you burn fat and stuff like that. It's not when you are training. Okay, we'll move on to that. So to continue on this slide, what helps to shuttle glucose is insulin. So, when you take a really high carbohydrate meal or sugar, you feel that, your body temperature has increased and all that stuff. That's because insulin is being spiked, and that's why you feel that increase in temperature. So insulin is really known to shuttle the glucose. But what people do not know is that a very effective training executed properly is a potent glucose transporter itself. So technically, if you are on a low carbohydrate diet and you train an AMPK program really well, you actually activate your body. It's called the GLUT4 glucose transporters. Basically, you actually create an insulin-like effect without insulin. So that would really, really help in burning your carbohydrates and shifting your body into a fat burning state. Why is this so important? Because insulin and growth hormone are opposing. If you want to lose fat, growth hormone is your best friend. If you want to put more fat on, insulin is your best friend. But then again, if you want, of course, when we talk about insulin, is great for hypertrophy phase or the muscle gaining phase, which we'll cover in the next topic. Not today, because that's another topic by itself. So just take note, if there's one thing you really need to remember is that growth hormone is your best friend. Insulin is the total opposite. Right, so going back to the previous point where exercise is your potent glucose transporter, you can be in a state of low or no carbs, but yet have a potent glucose transporter through your exercise. Okay, then what's the best protocol for fat loss? The best protocol is essentially having a proper strength training program followed by either a LISS cardio or a high intensity steady state cardio. This all depends on what phase you're in, because you cannot just chuck it in and say, I want to do HISS with my systemic work or my hypertrophy work. It doesn't work that way. It has to be paired accordingly. Okay, moving on to the next one. How should I structure my macros for fat loss? So moving from the highest priority to the lowest priority, what you need to take note of is your protein intake. Like what Chris said, protein has the highest thermogenic effect, so you need to satisfy the equation first. Your minimum daily requirements is 1.6 grams per body weight of kilogram, ranging up to 2.2 grams per body weight per kilogram. So at least try and fall in the 1.6. Of course, if you can, fall higher in the 2.2. The important thing is this: the lower your carbohydrates, the more you need to fall in the 2 grams and above range, because your body on low carbs would rely on blood glucose, and this blood glucose is derived from your amino acids. It's called the gluconeogenesis. All right, so once you're on low carb, your body will tap onto its own protein, and you don't want to tap onto your muscle cells. Now, carbohydrate intake will be your second. If you are someone who has more fat to lose and you are someone who is very much insulin not sensitive, you want to fall closer towards the 50 grams range. For someone who can tolerate carbohydrates, you want to fall somewhere around the 150 grams range. Of course, you need to see whether or not how strong you are. The stronger people tend to need more carbohydrates because they need to execute their training programs. If you're not sure, this is where you ask your coach. And then the third macronutrient, fat, this will take up your remaining calories. So for example, if you are supposed to take 1,800 calories and you take up 140, let me do my calculation here. Let's say I am 80 kilograms. So 80 times 2.2, I need 176 grams of protein, which means that's 700 calories alone. And if I take 150 grams of carbs, that's 600. So 700 plus 600, that's 1,300. If let's say for this phase to lose weight, I need to consume 1,800 calories. My remaining is 500 calories, which I divide it by 9. I will get 55 grams of fat. So your fat is usually the remaining calories. All right, again, any question later on, feel free to ask us. So now comes to this question: is carbohydrates the enemy? I know this is a question that everyone is kind of in doubt. It depends. Calorie deficit is extremely important to lose weight, absolutely. But so is insulin sensitivity. I think I have this question, or rather we had this question earlier where are all calories created the same? I think this will answer your question. So if can I consume 1800 calories, so I'm in a deficit. If let's say I need 2005, I consume 1800. Technically, I am in a deficit. Then technically I can lose weight. It depends. Yes, you may, or you actually may not. The thing is that for someone who isn't insulin sensitive, your carbohydrates and your glycemic index comes to play as well. Because again, if your glycemic index is high, it means that you're spiking your insulin. And remember what I mentioned about insulin and growth hormone, they are opposing. That's why you have to take this into account, especially if you're trying to drop to the very last point of body fat. All right, the second point, carbs intake is dependent on what training phase you're in. So if you're on an AMPK program or a systemic or a hypertrophy program for fat loss, your carbohydrates need to be on the higher side. If you are on a neural aspect of training, your carbohydrates can be on the lower side. This all depends on the program you're having, so it's better to ask your coach. Okay, now coming to the third point. What happens then if I'm on a low carb or zero carb training? This is not good because if your training is AMPK and you are burning through glucose, you're actually going to store more fat because you are going to cause a lot of stress in your body. So let's say AMPK burns through a ton of glucose and you have zero carbs. Again, where is your body going to draw the glucose from? It's going to draw from your amino acids through the process of gluconeogenesis. For gluconeogenesis to happen, it's an extremely stressful process and you're putting your body through a lot of stress. So again, what stress does, that whole insulin cortisol seesaw. So in short, it will help you. In the long run, you're actually going to put on more fat. So what's the best diet for fat loss? Well, it depends. The best diet is technically the one that suits your current training phase and your life stresses. So if you are on AMPK training or systemic training and you have a very stressful lifestyle, then obviously a low carb diet is not the best for you. How about intermittent fasting? Intermittent fasting is great because one of the effects of intermittent fasting is that it helps to increase some sort of growth hormone response. But then again, I'm talking into the context of what kind of a training phase you're in. So intermittent fasting is best done where you're on a systemic work, sort of okay with an AMPK work. Reason being, for AMPK, you really need a bit more carbohydrates. And if you are training early in the morning without any food, it may not be the best thing because you can't execute the training program at high intensity. How about a low carb, high fat, high protein diet? It's great if you are on a neural phase, not so much on other phases of training. And how about a moderate carb, moderate protein, and low fat? Well, again, like I said, it depends, but if you want to stay on the safe side, it's better to be on a moderate carb, moderate protein, and a low fat diet. If you have any questions, feel free to ask us later on. Now, this is the important part for fat loss. When do you time your nutrients? The best time to consume your carbohydrates is best done before your training and after your training. So you want to schedule your carbohydrate feeding around your training. Consuming your carbohydrates before training helps you to work out at a higher intensity. And also it helps to feed the kind of processes or the substrates that your training phase needs. Consuming your carbs post-training will help to ensure that it directs the carbohydrates into your muscle cells and or rather not into your fat cells. On your training days, you want to ensure that you're consuming your pre-workout meal with carbohydrates 2 hours before training so that it doesn't interfere with your gastric emptying. And this is the most crucial of all. Post-training, you want to ensure that your meal with carbohydrates is about 1.5 to 2 hours after your training ends. The reason for this is when you're on a systemic or AMPK phase, you produce a lot of lactate. When you produce a lot of lactate, a lot of growth hormone is being produced in the body. And this usually is spiked for a period of 2 to 3 hours. And then before it returns back to baseline. Like I said, growth hormone is what helps you lose fat. So you want to ensure that your growth hormone levels are elevated for as long as possible. And if you ingest some form of carbohydrates immediately after training, you technically are missing out on this really important point of your training. Okay. Next up, what are the other considerations for fat loss? Sleep, extremely important. Main reason why sleep is important is because if you don't sleep enough, your ghrelin, basically, ghrelin is the neurotransmitter that increases your appetite, and leptin is the one that helps to tell you that you're full. Your ghrelin and leptin levels will be out of whack, and what you will do is to eat more, right? And you will, most of the people, studies have showed that if you don't sleep enough, you will lean towards a higher carbohydrate meal. Now, the second thing is sleep will help produce growth hormone. So that's why, again, growth hormone, great for fat loss. If you don't sleep enough, it will affect your performance in the gym. This will affect your ability to contract properly. And of course, the last one, if you don't sleep enough, it will cause a lot of oxidative stress, the same kind of stress that Hiit would produce, or a low-calorie, low-carb diet would produce, which leads to unbalanced blood glucose. I'm sure all of you are familiar with brain fog. Some of you have been talking to me about it this morning. So that happens when you have an unbalanced blood glucose levels. So an increase in stress, be it your life or training, would ultimately lead to insulin resistance. And that prevents you from losing fat. Okay, pretty much almost done. What are the supplements that can help you in your fat loss? It is your L-carnitine L-tartrate, which is not to be confused with acetyl L-carnitine. Acetyl L-carnitine is for the brain, as L-carnitine L-tartrate is for your muscles. A good dose is about 1 to 4 grams, so this can be found in the supplements such as ProDefine. Fish oil, extremely important, 2 to 3 grams of EPA and DHA combined. So when you buy your fish oil, take note of how much EPA and DHA there is behind you. You need to have about 2 to 3 grams in your fish oil. The best ratio is of a DHA EPA of 1:2. This is extremely important because you have a reverse relationship. You're going to cause a lot of problems in your whole cellular health, right? What does fish oil do? Everyone's like, oh, it's just fish oil. Okay, your whole body is made out of cells, from your skin to your fats to your muscles. Everything is a cell. The fish oil is responsible for how permeable this cell membrane is. The more permeable the cell membrane is, the more fatty acids can be passed through to be used as fuel. If you eat too much saturated fat, or if you are too much chronically inflamed, either through too much Hiit work or too much carbohydrates, your cell will be less permeable, which means less energy will be coming out, less fatty acids will be utilized, and basically you can be in a low-calorie diet, but you can still pretty much not lose fat. The third supplement on the list is RALA, chromium and quercetin. All this can be found in supplements such as the glucocontrol. Supplements like that, because what they do is that they help to regulate your glucose. And the last but not least is caffeine at 150 to 300 mg per day. Try not to exceed 300 mg. This is a total caffeine per day. Just take note, with the use of caffeine for fat loss, the best time to use caffeine is before your training and not after your training. Okay, this is the important one. What caffeine does to your body is the minute you ingest it, it helps to release and elevates blood glucose. Again, it is great when you're trying to train because you can use this blood glucose as energy. But if you're going to consume caffeine when you're not training and you have an elevation of blood glucose, again, it goes nowhere and you're going to spike your insulin, right? That's not what you want. So just take note where you place your caffeine at. Okay, my last slide before I pass it back to Crystal for almost a closing. Why am I not losing weight? Number one, very simply, you're not in a calorie deficit. Number two, your insulin sensitivity may not be optimal. Again, this goes back to if it fit your macros, I'm sure some of you heard of that, IFFYM. As long as I'm within the certain calorie deficit, I should lose weight. No, it may not be true because you are not insulin sensitive. If you are pretty much like us, where we want to experiment everything, and we actually find out our blood, how much testosterone and stuff like that we have, your fasting glucose ideally should be between 70 to 90 nanograms per deciliter, and ideally below 84. All right, if you are anything above 84 of your ng per dl, you should sit on the lower spectrum of carbohydrate. If you are below, you can consume a bit more carbohydrates in your calorie deficit. You have been on a calorie deficit for way too long. Again, like what Chris said, you don't want to exceed about 16 weeks in your calorie deficit. If you are too much, it means, or if you're too long in this calorie deficit, you're causing way too much stress to your body, and your BMR and everything else will start to drop. And of course, the last but not least, you don't follow through your diet in the first place. You know, you can say that you try, I tried intermittent fasting, I tried low carb, and it didn't work for me. The thing is that how long do you try it for? Do you try it for 1 week? Do you try it for 2 weeks? Were you strict with it? Do you follow according to plan? Or do you just try it for 1 week, 2 weeks, and then the scale barely budged 300 grams and you say it didn't work, right? So really try and follow through the diet. If it's 8 weeks, follow through for 8 weeks. It takes about 30 days to form a habit. It takes about 30 days to really be okay for your body and your brain to say, okay, I'm actually getting used to this. So don't give up so fast. And Chris is going to talk more about habits. And I will, again, let you guys rest for 2 minutes before we end off. See you back.
Okay, so I know there was a lot of information to kind of take in, and some of you, maybe you're also really trying very hard. So there are some strategies that you can do to help you stay fuller when dieting. So first thing is you want to include more protein in your diet. So obviously including things like chicken breast, for example. So you want to include like lean protein, like chicken breast. You can add like tuna. You can add like certain form of fish, so on and so forth. You want to include food higher in fiber. So having more protein and fiber in your diet will help you increase your satiation. So basically, it helps you to feel fuller. So if you were to include more of those kind of food in your diet, you'll feel fuller, even with a lesser or similar calorie equated. So you also want to include soups in food, and take liquid meals before your solid meals. This will increase the volume in your stomach before you have your other solid food. So let's say for people who are taking like protein shake, you are in a fat loss phase, you can take your protein shake before having your main meal. So that will limit how much you take, or you just feel like you have to eat lesser. So to combine all of these, you want to eat your protein, eat your fiber, then eat your carbs. You want to follow this respective order. So what a healthy meal looks like. This is just a simple snapshot of what you can use. So if you look at lean protein, just 1 to 2 palm size. This is your palm size. This is not my palm size. Look at your palm size. Some of you have bigger palms, so adjust accordingly. So that is 1 to 2 palms per meal. So whether that's breakfast, lunch, or dinner, so on and so forth. Your carbs, you're looking at 1 to 2 cup hands. Fats, 1 to 2 thumb size. So you have things like your seeds, oils, avocado, nuts. So for reference, if you look at the avocado, right? If you put your thumb there, you'll probably be looking at a small slice, not the whole avocado. If you take that whole avocado, you'll be taking a lot of calories. A lot of people tend to overdo the calories on fats even. If you take 3 full avocado, that's going to be a lot of calories. Remember, fats are 9 calories per gram. Vegetables, you'll be looking at 1 or 2 feasts per meal. So yeah, that's a simple snapshot of something you can look at for your meals. If everything feels so confusing, this is something easy as a visual reference you can use. Next thing, or lastly to conclude, there's something called the habit-based coaching. So if we want to make a sustainable change in our life, as with anything, any other habits, you can focus on doing only one habit at a time. So some habits you can consider including for fat loss is eating a lean protein with each meal. Most of us, we don't have enough protein in our meal. and some of us may be sarcopenic obesity. So what that means is you may not have enough muscle mass, but you may have a lot of fat mass. So that's called like the skinny fat. So you want to make sure you have enough protein in your meal. Then another habit you can consider is having more fruits and vegetables with each meal. For example, like having one serving of fruits or vegetable a meal. The other thing is when you try to reduce your calorie intake or expenditure, so the body always has a system called homeostasis where you will try to control how much energy you expend. So what it does is you tend to move lesser when you have lesser calories or energy in your body. So something that can help to counter that is, you can set like doing an easy jog 10 minutes every day, for example. Obviously, that's not gonna burn a lot of calories, but it gets you in the habit of doing something, or even a walk. Go for a walk with your dog or something. I don't know. Then you want to choose an easy goal. You don't want to have a really ambitious goal, like something. Usually, the thing that most people will think of is choosing the perfect goal. But life isn't a straight line. There's a lot of ups and downs. So let's say, for example, if your goal is to do like 15,000 steps a day, first step, look at how many steps you're taking this week. Calculate that first. If you're only doing 1,000 steps, don't expect to make that 14,000 jump in like 1 week. It's not going to happen. Just maybe the next week you can aim for 1,000 additional steps. You want to choose something measurable. So obviously, like eating one lean protein with each meal, for example, or having 20 minutes of exercise daily. Report daily. So this will help to build that momentum of your habit. And what also helps in habit behavior studies is when you have a calendar, for example, when you can see yourself working towards your goals and kind of ticking them every day. This motivates people because you have something visual you can reference. So for some of you, that can be a calendar on your phone. It can be a calendar that's printed out, or whatever it is, something that you can see that will help you be motivated. Do not miss 2 sessions consecutively. If you miss a session, the next session, get back on it. So missing once may happen by accident, but missing twice is the start of a new habit. So you want to make sure you keep that in mind. And the last thing is you want to schedule your desired action in advance. So for example, I will carry out a certain behavior at what time, in what location. This is what we call an implementation intention. So most of the time, people, they don't plan in advance. When you already set something in your calendar, for example, you have a higher likelihood of doing it. So for me, what I do is in my calendar, I'll set like, since I have a lot of sessions in the day for work or what, I'll block out like 3 to 4 o'clock, for example, is my training. And that is a sacred time for me. And I'll make sure I'll do my training at that time and at 204 gym or 186 gym, for example. Make it so specific that the likelihood of you doing it is so much higher. And with that, we thank you all for your attention, and we will take a 2 to 3 minutes break when we come back for Q&A. All right, so we have a lot of questions. Thank you for all your questions. So we'll be starting with Sophine's question, which is fat loss, are we looking at 0.5 to 1% per week is based off your body weight? The answer is yes. So example will be if I'm 100 kg, I'll be looking at 1 kg per week that you'll be losing, for example, or 500 grams, just to keep it very simple. Okay, next we're going to move on for Pearlie's question. How do you calculate the amount of calorie deficit BMR? So obviously, if you look at the slide with the 1,800 calories earlier, so let's say a person has a BMR of 1,800. So if you want to be in a deficit, let's say you have to be expending more calories than that. Your energy expenditure has to be above 1,800. So obviously you can either 2 things or 3 things you can do. One is you can reduce your calorie intake. So instead of 1,800, you maybe intake 1,500 calories. So that's a 300 deficit, for example. And the other way, obviously, you increase your energy expenditure by exercise, activity. The thing about all of this is that, or even with fitness tracker, activity trackers, is there's quite a bit of inaccuracy in the measurement. Even with food intake, when you do your tracking, there will be some calculation errors or estimation errors. What you do want to look at is your weight. If your body weight is stagnant for 2 weeks and it's been hovering about the same range, then you are not in a deficit, as Myren mentioned. So then you have to adjust or recalculate your maintenance calories, right? So you want to make sure that all of these things are in your favor. And like just taking like your daily steps as an additional tracker or measurement will also be very helpful, because as I mentioned, when you go in a calorie deficit, over time, the longer your diet goes, your body will subconsciously reduce your calorie expenditure. So you tend to move less, you fidget less. Like, when you're watching TV, instead of like going up and changing the channel, let's say you got no remote, you supposed to off, right? Switch the change button if you go in front and press the change button. But because you are conserving energy, you wouldn't even want to do that. You maybe ask somebody in your family to do that for you. So those are things that we do subconsciously. So if you have a step tracker, that will help. The next question.
So the next question again by Pearly. If one has lower calorie intake, does the BMR go down? Yes, it will. You need to understand what basal metabolic rate is. It's basically your cell's activity that's needed for your daily activities. The higher or the more muscle mass you have, the higher your BMR. But again, your body always wants to go to homeostasis. So the thing is that once you go into a really, really low calorie deficit, your cells in your body will not want to work as efficient anymore. Your thyroid regulation will go down. So you can't go on an extreme calorie deficit for too long. This can and should only be done in the last 1 or 2 weeks, where we're really trying to bring down your percentage of body fat to for ladies like 15%, or guys in the single digits. Okay, the next one.
Okay, so for Sim's question, this one you can check with your coach. that's one. But if you are trying to pick up a new habit to increase your calorie expenditure, then you can consider doing, maybe an easy 10 minutes run every day. And that will definitely help in the calorie expenditure side of things.
Cherry's question, is there a better time for Hiit, example in the morning in a non-stress state, or rather than an evening after a day's work? Okay, this depends on what are you looking at Hiit for. If you're looking at Hiit for the effects of the EPOC, the excess post-exercise, post-oxygen consumption, it doesn't matter when you're hitting. But that being said, if you are going to do Hiit in the evening, just take note that you will have problems sleeping at night. So it's better to do it early in the day. Again, because you need sleep for your growth hormone production, so it's better to do it earlier in the day. Other than that, there is no difference, to be honest. Yvonne's question, would Hiit cause an Epoc effect? Yes, it will. Whether it's Hiit or it's Hiit, it doesn't matter, because the thing is that you are trying to work out in a state of an anaerobic capacity. Anaerobic means in the absence of oxygen. So both HISS and HIIT are in an anaerobic state, so it will cause an Epoc effect.
So how often should you perform a Hiit workout per week? I will say something like 2 times or less will be safe. For some people, they can scrape through with 3. For myself, it's 2 or even less. The stronger you are, the lesser you should be doing that. You will be putting yourself into a high stress state.
Just to talk about that, you may not even need to do a Hiit workout. Like for me, last year when I went into a single digit 6% body fat from 14%, I did absolutely no cardio. So it is not important. But if you want to do it, yeah, sure. Phoebe's question, if we were to take carbo 2 hours after training, and if the training ends at 8:30, meaning we should eat only at 10:30 p.m., isn't it too late? Well, yes, it will be too late because it will interfere with your sleep quality. Then I suggest for people like that, it's best, I think Emery has the same question, right? It's best that you consume your carbohydrates before, which means before training and the meal before training. And then, but just ensure to consume enough amino acids or protein about an hour and a half to 2 hours after. That being said, you want to be careful not... Okay, never mind. This is for the next session. Or if there's time, I'll talk about whey protein isolate. Okay, I'll go to the next question first. It doesn't matter if caffeine is ingested with dairy. If you're looking at the caffeine effects, no, it doesn't matter because your caffeine levels will still be high. Or rather, it won't be diminished.
Okay, for Gil's question, yes, do not take fat burners. So I actually had a friend in Dragon Boat last time. He used to take like this fat burner, like high hydroxy cut or whatever fat burners, and he has health complications to this very day. He has to take steroids to support his liver function. Do not take fat burners because they are adding a lot of ingredients that you don't need for fat loss.
Okay, to answer Gil's question, fish oil versus CLA. CLA, it's basically conjugated linoleic acid. It works in a very different function to fish oil. Fish oil helps your cell membrane become more permeable. CLA is just a natural occurring fatty acid that's found in meat and dairy products. It just helps more of a bit of like a transportation, but again, CLA is not really needed. It is found in a few fat burning products, inverted commas, but to be honest, when I was taking CLA and I was bodybuilding, it did nothing to me.
For this police question, what is wrong with a high-fat diet for the first phase, especially good fats? Can you elaborate what is first phase? Maybe you can type down there, Pearly. Oh yeah, or you can answer. You just unmute and just let us know.
Yeah, the first 12 weeks. So like low carb, but high protein, high fat. Is that okay?
Yes, low carbs, high protein, high fat is okay if you are not in a hypertrophy phase, not in an AMPK phase, not in a systemic phase, which means that leaves you only in a neuro phase, a pure strength phase. And also it depends on how low are you talking about. How low is that?
Like just carbs from maybe one slice of fruit, 2 slices of fruit, but no rice, no rice, no.
Okay, it's kind of low. If let's say 2 slices of bread, you're probably looking at about 30 grams of carbohydrates. So it is kind of low. And I think I briefly mentioned earlier in the morning that you don't want to go so deep or straight into a low carb diet if you're not used to it. And again, check with your coach what kind of a phase you're in, and you may not want to go so low because it's really going to give you a brain fog.
Okay, for Justin's question, so it's fruit or veg. So for that habit picture that you see earlier, it is it's fruit or veggie. Yeah. So for Cherry's question, sugar is tricky to identify. Dairy and fruits will have an impact on the glucose. Yes, fructose will impact the glucose, will increase the blood glucose level to a certain degree.
Continue. Okay, so dairy, this is a hit and miss for some Asian like me. Unfortunately, my body gets inflamed and irritated when I take dairy, so I cannot. Fruits, like what Crystal mentioned, it's fructose. What fructose does is it feeds the liver and only the liver. However, that being said, it is to be considered as a carbohydrate. So if you have 30 grams of fructose, you can consider it as 30 grams of carbs taken. But you want to be careful with that because, like I said, it feeds the liver, it doesn't feed your muscles. Is it okay to consume fruits then? Yes, it's okay to consume fruits, but you have to take that into account of your daily carbohydrate intake.
Is it okay to have cheat meals? I will say yes. If you stay deprived for too long, I think you will go crazy on your diet and you may take even more calories. You'll be in a crazy surplus over a prolonged period of time. But obviously, with your cheat meals, don't go really crazy on that. So the reason why people go into cheat meals is because they feel very deprived over a prolonged period of time. So if you feel like you have a need to do that, then you probably have to readjust your calories to find something that is more sustainable. How long? Okay, now moving on to Gita's question. How long can a fat loss phase be before going back to hypertrophy? Yes, the answer is 16 weeks. 16 weeks is 4 months already. So usually after a fat loss phase, one can either go into maintenance to really bump up the calories first, to get your body into a maintenance calories first, to get your whole body to readjust, as the body is always going through a state of homeostasis, right? Before you can go on to a gain phase. Okay, for Gita's question, next one, how can one judge whether calorie deficit is too low for too long? Can one say that if BMR goes down, that's an indication that calorie deficit is too deep or gone on for too long? Okay, so naturally, if you are in a calorie deficit, you'll be losing weight over a prolonged period of time, of course. And when you lose weight, some of that may come from muscle also. So naturally, your BMR will go down. And is that an indication whether the deficit is too deep or gone too long? We'll rather look at other factors like your appetite. That's one. Like, do you feel like you kind of lost appetite, or you feel like your energy levels, you just feel like so depleted? You just hate life, and you just don't look. You lose motivation, and you lose your sex drive, and that there's a whole host of things. We'll rather look at those indicators to know if you've gone on deficit for too long.
Just to write onto the answer again, how do you know whether you've gone on for too long or whether you're too much in a deficit? One of the indicators to see that your performance in the gym suffers. If you're not able to lift the weight that you used to lift, we have a problem. So check with your coach. And to answer Anne-Marie's question, that's fine. Like what I answered Pearly, if you cannot eat because you're training too late, that's okay as long as you replenish the carbohydrates the next day. The thing about carbohydrates that's different from amino acids is that carbohydrates will be stored, which means if you were to consume carbohydrates earlier in the day or the day before, it will be stored in your muscle cells, your liver, and your blood glucose, and it will not be used unless it is needed to tap into. Unlike amino acids, where it gets metabolized between 1 to 6 hours, depending on what kind of food you're having, amino acids you need to always replenish. So amino acids wise, you have to replenish post-training, but carbs, you probably don't want to. Let's just, since you're on this again, right, I'm going to go back to the question, the whole thing about whey protein isolate. For those, again, if you're on a fat loss phase, try not to consume any food, even protein, post-training. You can consume essential amino acids. But the thing about whey protein isolate, if you're really, really going to try and drop weight, it's not advisable to consume it because it spikes your insulin in the absence of carbohydrates. What whey protein does that nobody knows why they're taking is that it spikes your insulin levels so that your cortisol production will be halted. That is what whey protein isolate does. So for fat loss, try to switch to essential amino acids and BCAAs during your training, essential amino acids after your training, if this is something you want to get serious. Okay.
Okay, so for Chun Xian's question, is tofu or soybean a good source of protein? Does it affect testosterone? It is a good source of protein, yes. Does it affect testosterone? Studies have been unequal, kind of neutral, kind of leaning on both sides. Okay, so if this is what I'll reply, if you're vegetarian or someone that's vegan, and you have trouble finding protein sources, then this will be something you can consider taking. But obviously, if you you can eat like good protein sources, you have no restriction in your diet, then I'll say you can go for lean meat, like your chicken, your fish, eggs, and stuff like that. So for Avon's question, how do I calculate my BMR? Okay, so your BMR, right? So basically, if you do your in-body body fat measurement, you can see your BMR number there. So to kind of answer back like what Pearly asked earlier, if you want to be in a deficit, for example, then you have to be eating lesser than that amount over there in your BMR in-body sheet measurement number. Because so that BMR will be basically the more muscle mass you have, the higher your BMR will be, right? So yes. So for Gil's question, are there optimal intermittent fasting ratios? 16:8, 18:6, or 24? So this one.
Okay, so studies have shown that technically all three would produce about the same effects. If you ask us, we would lean towards 16:8 and at the very most 18:6, because if you go on a 24, your training will be affected. And again, you're going way too long without amino acids in your body. So our preferred will be 16:8. Again, combined with your, it's okay. The growth hormone response from that is okay, not too bad. But again, combined with your systemic or AMPK training, it should elevate your growth hormone substantially. Can coffee and green tea be consumed during intermittent fasting? Yes, it can. Anything that has 0 calories can be consumed during intermittent fasting. Regards to Anne-Marie's question, any specific carbs to eat pre-workout? Fast-acting carbohydrates would be preferred, or things like pasta. Actually, pasta would be better than rice because it works better on the on your GI, or not your GI, sorry, your gut health. It's better processed. Again, if you're going to eat complex carbs very close, like let's say an hour and a half to 2 hours before training, it may not be digested. So it depends on how early is early. If your pre-workout is like 4 hours, it doesn't matter. So to answer Alicia's last question, some research has shown that intermittent fasting may not be the best for women. We need to see the research, because if it's only one study, then we have yet to conclude on that. But the study that we have is a case study across the board, and it shows that men and women are actually, there's not much of a difference in terms of the results. Okay.
All right, and we are done here. If you do have any questions, you can continue to type them down. We will get back to you. Okay, let me see. Yvonne said something. When is the next knowledge session? That will be on muscle mass, right? Muscle gain, hypertrophy stuff. Okay. Oh, okay. So they it will be most likely after Chinese New Year. So just stay tuned to it. Nothing confirmed yet. Do you not take the calories consumption from exercise into consideration from deficit? Yes, we do. Sorry? Oh, it's actually in the slides, but we will send the slides to you, everyone, after this, together with the recording, and then you guys can take a look again. Any other last words? Thank you, HP Coaches. Very nice. Okay. All good here?
All good.
Okay. Thank you guys for joining in, and for 1.5 hours. It was not a very long time, actually. We had to rush everything. So I hope you guys it wasn't too technical for you guys to absorb all. Okay, see you guys soon again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.